Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for the Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. I want to say a few words today about content changes that are coming to the Mindful Eye. For the foreseeable future, the Daily Critique is going to be changing to the extent that on Mondays I'm going to be publishing a longer form Daily Critique. It'll be longer because it will have more information about design relative to the image being discussed and or more specific information about how I worked inside of Adobe Photoshop to create an alternative version of the image being reviewed. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays I'm going to be releasing daily critiques that are much shorter form. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. One is just based on feedback that we get about the daily critique episodes, and two, releasing shorter form videos on Tuesday and Wednesday is going to free me up to return to creating content that in the past has been very popular on the Mindful Eye, and I'm talking about episodes of our From Start to Finish feature and also episodes of the Light Diary vidcast. If you're not familiar with that content on the Mindful Eye, we have older versions of those videos that are in our archive. You can click on content in the top left-hand corner of our home page, look at the listing of our content features, and you will see sections for From Start to Finish and the Light Diary vidcast. From Start to Finish episodes are where I take one image and I go all the way from the very beginning of my creative process, talk about conceiving of the image, and go all the way to the end and talk about how I finish the image in the digital darkroom. The Light Diary vidcasts connect to the images on my blog. I may take one image or a series of images and give you quite a bit of backstory information about how the images were created. And you may be wondering, well, what about your blog, Craig? It's been stagnant for a long time, and that's true. It's been stagnant for months. I've essentially relaunched my blog and would love to have you go to the top left-hand corner of the home page and click on Craig's blog to visit my blog. If you go and have questions about the images that I'll be posting there moving forward, or any comments, the questions and comments that you have about images are going to directly shape future Light Diary vidcasts. So I'd love to have you join me on that part of the Mindful Eye experience. I want to say a big thank you to you for being here, and you'll notice that these changes to the daily critique have already started this week. Monday's critique was longer, yesterday's critique was shorter, today's will be again 2, minus these words that I'm giving you about changes to the content, and the links of these videos are pretty typical of what you can expect moving forward. If you're somebody that wants a longer video with more information, or if you would like a shorter 5 or 6 or 7 minute long video on the daily critique. Today's image was created by Anil, who recently created this image on our Death Valley National Park workshop. Anil was working with a Canon 5D Mark II camera body, 16 to 35 zoom at an effective focal length of 35 millimeters. The exposure trio is ISO 100, f14, and 0.4 of a second. Right away, I would say that when it comes to aperture here, unless I wanted an overall softening effect, I might not stop this far down on this lens. This is a lens that I own, and I know for a fact that it's noticeably less sharp overall due to diffraction at f14 than it might be at an aperture 2 or 2.5 stop down from wide open. And in the case of this image, if I was going for grit and texture and detail, instead of stopping down to f14 to get depth of field, I might stay at more of a middle aperture like f6.7 and do a focus stack here from the tripod. Focus close, middle, and far, and either use Adobe Photoshop or a piece of software like Helicon Focus to stack these so that we get the best of 2 worlds. A very overall critically sharp aperture and the combination of frames that are focused to different places to give an extraordinary amount of depth of field in the image. When it comes to workflow in Photoshop, one of the things that I love to do to every image is a series of steps to just give me a different take on the image. I love to look at every image in black and white. I also like to take images and just quick rotate them. A lot of times just flip them left to right. One of the ways that our brain works to perceive things is to create an alternative version of it. A great example of this is color. We actually need to create an alternative version of color or complement of color to be able to perceive it. And this connects directly to a pretty complicated area of perception of color called afterimaging. I like to flip images for the same reason. A lot of times it's not until I flip an image that I really understand what's happening in terms of the implied motion and the way I was actually moving through the image to begin with, and what elements of design were causing me to take a specific journey through the image. Another thing that I love to do to each image is to go into curves and essentially use curves to give myself alternative exposures of the image. A lot of times I'll first just pull up on the middle of the curve and gradually increase the brightness as if I had exposed the image by 1 stop and then 2 stops and then 3 stops, so on and so forth. And as I'm doing this work on the curve, I'm going to look at how I feel about the image overall and also try to consider individual areas of the image that may be helped by some brightening, and then I'll go in the opposite direction and I'll make the image darker, and again I'll be looking at how I feel about the image overall and then local areas of the image that might be helped by the change that I'm making. And this is an image where when I darken the image, for me, I start to experience an image that has much more depth, has much more of a feeling of movement of light, and I feel like it's an image that I'm going to stay with longer. Let me talk about the things that I like about Anil's image, and there are a lot of things that I like. One of the things that I really like about this image is implied movement. I get a real strong sense of moving in a simple way and clear way throughout the image on this diagonal right when I move in. I want to move in this way because I read from left to right, and there are a series of real strong lines, important contrast in the image, implied shapes that move me along in a very coherent way. Another thing that I enjoy about the image is dynamic quality of line. Most of the lines in this image are implied to move diagonal, which is exciting. There's a lot of movement on these lines. There are shapes that are implied that are also very exciting and higher energy shapes, and there's even a shape in the middle of the image. To me, this is one of the main ideas of the image, that not only is dynamic, but it represents archetypal ideas that could have a big effect on me in terms of the space shape that's being implied and the quality of line connecting to ideas that are universal in the image. Another thing that I like about this image is I'm really enjoying what's happening in terms of textures that are here in the image, and I'm also enjoying the depth that is being created by the difference between warm and cool. We know already that I am going to come in and make a curves adjustment to the image to make it overall darker. Here's where we just played with the idea of changing exposure after the fact. I'm going to hit the delete button to get rid of that, and then I'm going to turn on my actual curves adjustment layer where I made things darker. After this change to the image, I came in and I made another curves adjustment layer to essentially contain the eye. I darkened in here, darkened in the corner, darkened here, also darkened in here somewhat, and I darkened in here somewhat to keep my eye in the frame and to essentially start to emphasize this as one of the anchoring ideas in the image. So there is that change. Let me do before and after one more time. I then came in and made a levels adjustment to pop the high end of this image, the very bright white lines that almost look like a vein that is sitting on top of the other pattern and texture in the image. Then came in and used selective color to essentially mute the difference between warm and cool just a little bit, so the image is not so much about color, particularly right here in this area, and it's a little bit more about form and texture. And then at the end I wanted to pop the contrast even more. I came in and I made a levels adjustment, and I really like what was happening with high contrast here, and so I popped that again to really make the feeling of those very thin lines of salt pop off of the image. Here is where we started, and here is where we have ended up. Would love to hear your feedback about the image today. One powerful takeaway at the end of the video is just something very basic to think about when it comes to design. That is, so much of the time working with very high value or high energy ideas in a way where there is a little bit of a high energy idea and a lot of a lower energy idea can be more visually exciting. It's definitely one of those ideas that can be turned on its head, and a great example would be presenting an image in more of a high key way. like Anil has done today. I enjoy both versions of the image. Would love to hear your feedback about the changes that we made. I want to say a huge thank you to Anil for sharing the image with us. Thank you so much today for listening to the ideas that I presented about content changes to TME. Would love in this thread to not only hear your feedback about the daily critique today, but any thoughts that you might have about those ideas that I discussed relative to TME content changes. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again real soon on The Mindful Eye.